Hi everyone, it's me, Sam, again, and this week our lecture is called Nobody Cares About Your Grandma and Other Lessons About Making a Bigger Point. Okay, so I should explain. When I was in undergrad, I was in a creative writing class. It was a fiction class. It was a higher level class, and the instructor was this woman named Carolyn Doty, and she was amazing. She was about 5 feet tall, and she wore enormous hats every day for some reason, and she was the crabbiest human being on the planet. And very tough. She was an extremely tough teacher, and she wouldn't let us get away with anything. And in the beginning we thought she was just mean or crabby or there was something wrong with her, but in fact, she respected us so much that she held us to our highest standards. And it made us all better writers. But one day, we're all workshopping, and it's this one guy's turn, and he had written this sort of, I thought it was a lovely piece about his grandma. And there was a lot of real visceral description, and it was all first person, so he was talking about, he's using I. And, that something was missing, but I couldn't put a finger on it. So it got around to Doty, the instructor, the prof. It got around to her turn to give a critique, and she said, she threw the story on the table, and she goes, "Nobody cares about your grandma." And of course, we were all sort of taken aback by that because, generally speaking, you don't badmouth somebody's poor grandma. But the point she was trying to make was that my fellow student's story had no bigger point. There was nothing in it for the reader. The reader simply read the descriptions and had some kind of sense about what my friend experienced, but there was no universal message. There was no bigger idea there. And moving on, you have to imagine, what's your gaga have to do with me? Now, readers are the most selfish people ever. They just are. And it makes sense to be selfish because reading is work and reading takes time. So if I get an essay and I see that it's going to take me 10 or 15 minutes to read, that's 10 or 15 minutes that I'm not spending with my kids, or that I'm not cleaning the kitchen because it's terribly filthy, or that I'm not walking the dog, and so on and so forth. So that essay had better teach me something about myself, or about life, or about something. It better give me something that is relevant to me. And this goes for a story, and it goes for a text message, it goes for any piece of writing that we're going to do. Oh, poor sweet grandma. Okay, that's not my gaga, by the way. That gaga is from the internet. Okay. So, in order to get to this point, you have to continually ask yourself, what is the bigger idea? What's the big idea here? Just another example, if I can remember it correctly, please forgive me if I can't, but a student handed in this essay about her first job, and it was at McDonald's. And basically, it was it was a personal narrative, which we've already done. And this was several years ago, so none of you know this student, by the way. But in any case, it was chronological, so she, talked about pulling up into the parking lot, opening the door, going in, turning on the fryer, clocking in, whatever, and basically discussed a shift at McDonald's. And so the only people that story is really relevant to are people who are considering working at McDonald's, right? It was less an essay and more of like a training guide for how to do that. So we met, this student and I, was when I was teaching residentially, and I said, I don't really care about working at McDonald's. And she must have thought I was terribly crabby, like I thought my old prof was. But she said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I'm not going to work at McDonald's at this point, probably, and I never have worked at McDonald's, so none of this information is really relevant to me. And I said, what is this really about? What lesson did you learn from working at McDonald's? And she thought about it, and we kind of went back and forth, and she did some more free writing, and she thought a little bit more. And she came up with this really lovely piece about how working at McDonald's actually taught her how to work hard, but also how to aspire to achieve bigger things. And that was a message that most readers can get behind. It's a story about hard work and about aspiration. She didn't want to work at McDonald's forever. And so while she worked as hard as she could while she was there, she also worked outside of McDonald's to try and improve her life, which is why she was at school. So this is what you do. You use your story or essay to illuminate a more a more universal message. And you always think to yourself, what lesson did I learn from this story? And these are just ways that you can take your story or your essay from being solely about you to being something, or to offering a message that every reader can get behind. Okay. What's your gaga have to do with my compare-contrast essay? Winston Churchill. By the way, that's not really Winston Churchill. He never said that. The point is, all of this that I've talked about so far is really relevant for the personal narrative that we've already done. So how does making a bigger point, how is it relevant to your compare-contrast, which is what you're working on right now? And even further than that, how is it relevant to any other piece of writing? Well, look, in terms of compare-contrast, a point-by-point comparison just doesn't make a good essay. It makes a good list, right? You can say, South Dakota has a lot of woods. Florida has a lot of beaches. South Dakota has seasons. Florida is warm a lot. And South Dakota has tornadoes, and Florida has hurricanes. But see, there's no bigger point there. It's just a list. It's a list of things about two different states. So what we need to ask ourselves again is, what can we learn by comparing and contrasting these two items? What's the bigger point? You use that comparison then to make a bigger point. So if I was going to talk about, if I wanted to compare two places where I've lived, I would, let's say, compare my hometown, Hutchinson, Kansas, small town Kansas, and I would compare it with New York City, where I've lived for 5 or 6, 7 years, for a while, long enough. Now, my comparison might be interesting to some readers because, on the surface, these two cities, have nothing in common. But I might actually try to make the point that, despite their different sizes and despite the surface differences between these two places, I might make the claim that that New York almost feels like a smaller town than Hutchinson. When I lived in the East Village, for example, I didn't ever really have to leave the East Village. I just didn't. Everything that I ever needed was there. All my friends were there. Everybody that I saw on a daily basis clearly was there. It was easy enough to get in and out of there. But in fact, I started recognizing more people just walking down the street in the East Village than I would going to the mall in Hutchinson, Kansas. So the bigger point there is, maybe the bigger point is, don't judge a book by its cover, or, New York City can be Sometimes you find intimate spaces in the biggest places. That's a bigger point. Um, Sometimes the you find sometimes a small town can be isolating, or sometimes a big city can be more like a small town. Anyway, you get the idea. There's a bigger point there. So, one thing to check out here, this essay, it's called Grant and Lee, A Study in Contrast. It's by Bruce Catton. And you can Google this and just find it online. But it's a really awesome essay, and maybe it's an awesome essay because I love history and that kind of thing. But I think you'll get a kick out of it too. And what he does is he compares, obviously, General Grant and General Lee, the two opposing generals from the Civil War. And he goes into detail about their character and about this, and Grant was from the North and Lee was from the South, and he talks about how their opposing personalities really represented their sides. So Grant, who was from the North, was an individualist and a sort of rugged individualist, and he believed in expansion and going westward, and how people should be in control of their own destiny. Whereas Lee, the Southerner, was born into this sort of hierarchy and the gentry, and he believed in being born into wealth and maintaining this sort of status quo and so on and so forth. Well, that's exactly what the country looked like at the time. In any case, look it up. It's a very quick read, and for all of you history buffs out there, it's excellent. Okay, so I'm moving on very quickly. I don't want to keep you too much longer. So, why is this relevant? This is the question that I want you to constantly think in your mind as you write almost everything. Why is this relevant to a reader? And I want you to think about this too as we move into the final essay, which is an argumentative or persuasive paper that uses research. And keep in mind, your reader will perpetually ask this question. Every sentence that he or she reads, they'll say, why is this relevant to me? And in an effective essay, the answer to that question is always obvious. Okay, that's it. Questions? Email me. Give me a call. Why don't we talk anymore? You never drop by. Shoot me a text message, for goodness sakes. We can also chat on FaceTime. I'm on Google Chat a lot, and I'm always happy to have a phone call too. Hope everyone's great. Let me know if you have questions.